Despite the standard measurement practices put in place today, the definition of poverty is ambiguous. In this presentation, we will explore the question, how should we define and measure poverty in the U.S. today? Our approach is a relative approach with both quantitative and discursive measurements based off of a new list of capabilities. But first, the basics. The measurement methods analyzed will be either an absolute or relative approach. An absolute measure of poverty is set based on a standardized style of living. It does not accommodate for geographic differences, the surrounding culture, or individualized circumstances, despite the varying cost of living for each. The only reason the threshold fluctuates is because of inflation.
Conversely, according to Iceland, relative measures explicitly define poverty as a condition of comparative disadvantage. A relative measurement gauges what resources you have compared to those in the community around you, or to be assessed against some relative, shifting, or evolving standard of living. This measurement accounts for changes in standardized living as time goes on. How is poverty in the U.S. currently being measured? The current system we have in place is the Official Poverty Measurement, or the OPM for short. The OPM has two steps. First, a total family income in one household is calculated. This includes pre-tax income, benefits, dividends, and more, really anything that has a cash equivalent. The second step is the income amount is compared to a set threshold, and if the household falls below this set threshold, they are technically in poverty. This means that all family members have the same poverty status. A determination of the threshold for poverty is in terms of a dollar amount. If a family falls below this threshold according to their calculated income, they are technically in poverty. The poverty rate is the percentage of people who fall below this threshold. Whether or not a family qualifies for need-based assistance in the United States is based on where they fall on the OPM threshold. How is the OPM threshold determined? First, the price of the cheapest food plan is taken and multiplied by 3. Why 3? Most people spend a third of their income on food. People used to actually spend a larger portion of their income on food, but this ratio has not been updated since 1969. Secondly, they scale the poverty threshold down based on one's age and number of people living in a household. Some advantages of the OPM include that resources are a good detector of poverty, threshold can easily be scaled to different household sizes, and it is easy to use for an entire nation, which is why the United States have had this system for so long. Disadvantages include the official poverty thresholds do not vary geographically, but rather are updated for inflation using the Consumer Price Index. Additionally, the OPM excludes from measurement certain categories of individuals. Lastly, the OPM does not include Earned Income Tax Credit, TANF, SNAP, assistance for rent or utilities, or other government aid in the income calculation.
Recognizing the flaws of the OPM, the Interagency Technical Working Group designed another measure of poverty, the Supplemental Poverty Measure. The SPM is a quasi-relative model focusing on food, clothing, utilities, shelter, and miscellaneous costs. The poverty threshold is set by identifying the 33rd percentile for the average amount spent in each category. There are also many more factors that the SPM takes into consideration. The SPM is advantageous because it considers everybody's situation individualistically. Because the SPM is sensitive to geographic regions, it is culturally dependent. Sen states, in a country that is generally rich, more income may be needed to buy enough commodities to achieve the same social function, such as appearing in public without shame. Not exclusively based on food, it gauges a more holistic picture of a family unit's financial stability. And while the OPM standard of living has stayed constant since 1969, the threshold continuously adjusts. On the contrary, the SPM does generally set the threshold at a higher, more comfortable level. If the SPM was implemented, according to this graph from Short, the overall poverty rate would rise. If more people are deemed as impoverished, how will this self-fulfilling prophecy affect government support and communities? The SPM is also more difficult to measure. So what is missing from the OPM and SPM? The measurement of capabilities and functions. Functionings are a state of being and doing. When you add proper political, economic, and social conditions, a person is deemed as capable. The capability approach uses this formula for capabilities to determine whether or not someone is impoverished. According to Nussbaum, everyone should have these basic capabilities. When someone cannot fulfill a capability, they are considered impoverished. Nussbaum states, the violation of an entitlement grounded in basic justice is not a large cost. It is a cost of a distinctive sort, one that in a fully just society no person has to bear. The capability approach positively focuses on everybody's ability to lead a fulfilling life, not materiality. While this is an utopian ideal, it is subjective because of its necessary discursive measurement. Also, Nussbaum's list can be perceived as controversial. Someone can lack a capability, but not be considered poor. Someone diagnosed with cancer loses the full capability of bodily health, but if they are a millionaire, are they still considered poor? Conversely, someone can have every capability, but may still be financially poor. Someone can be perfectly healthy, living in a small community in the mountains, with an abundance of resources, but no income. So are they considered poor? We recognize the search for the best measurement of poverty is difficult because of these subjective questions. Do people inherit the right of comfort or survival? Do social norms dictate what is necessary to survive? How should mismanagement of money affect placement on the poverty spectrum? To what extent are upper-class geographic locations considered a luxury, and should this be accommodated for? And to what extent can capabilities be subjectively measured?
How should we define poverty? Identifying a minimal combination of basic capabilities can be a good way of setting up the problem of diagnosing and measuring poverty. Though Nussbaum created her own list of basic capabilities, we disagree that these capabilities are helpful when measuring poverty. We mentioned earlier how someone may lack one of these capabilities, but still may not be poor. So we decided to create our own list of basic capabilities that are necessary for human dignity and help us define poverty. These are capabilities that we have defined as being basic needs that all people must have in order to have human dignity. So our list of capabilities include being appropriately clothed, maintaining a healthy diet, the ability to maintain daily hygiene, access to a stable shelter and utilities, having an education, being able to care for those you affiliate with, and abiding by necessary social norms. To look more into Capability 7, studies have shown that poor children tend to become poor adults, which then creates a cycle that those who start in poverty have a difficult time getting out of it. According to Janty, the large differences in the persistence between own earnings and combined earnings, especially in the United States, suggest that the positive marital sorting, that is, the extent to which high-wage women marry high-wage men, is quite strong. This suggests that social exclusion is a real thing for those coming from poverty. Poor people don't fit in as well as people from wealthier backgrounds because they cannot afford to live in the same lifestyle as their richer counterparts, for example, buying a smartphone or having a car. This is why we strongly believe that having the capability of abiding by social norms is so important for people living in poverty to have. So how should we measure poverty? We would base it on our list of basic capabilities. Essentially, we would use a mixture of the SPM and the capabilities approach. It would be a quasi-relative measurement. So to measure capabilities 1 through 4, we would calculate a threshold similar to the SPM based on the average cost of necessities for the average American and comparing that to the income of each individual. It would set the expenditures for each of these categories like the SPM does, including food, shelter, clothing, and utilities, and we would also calculate daily hygiene products into the miscellaneous category, along with the other items it already includes. All these expenditures would be looked at to create the poverty threshold. We would look at the 33rd percentile, which would be a dollar amount, and if your income is below that, you would be classified as living in poverty. Income would be calculated after benefits and taxes were taken into account, similar to the way the SPM measures. Measuring an education will have to be measured differently than we measured capabilities 1 through 4. First, we believe that all children and teens ages 6 to 18 should have access to public schooling, and anyone denied this opportunity would be at risk of poverty. If anyone is forced to drop out of schooling for income-related reasons before the age of 18, they would be at risk of being classified as living in poverty. This system is already present in the United States and should be continued. We would keep track of the dropout rate to measure this part of poverty. Lastly, for capabilities 6 and 7, we would use a discursive approach to measure these, thus allowing people to argue if they are lacking in the remainder of the categories or if they feel like the government isn't providing. People would be able to argue in court or submit forms or complaints online. All in all, we believe the current approach to defining and measuring poverty in the U.S. today is outdated and struggles to capture real-life needs of those living in poverty. Our new approach would holistically look at a family unit's circumstance to ensure that all Americans will have human dignity and that their quality of life will be correctly defined.